Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. It's Monday. It is September the 29th, and we are rolling late by about 5 minutes. Sometimes I underestimate the scope of work coming in from the weekend. There's not a lot of people who are going to get yelled at for being 5 minutes late, but yes, our chat is already grouchy with me for being the 5 minutes late, and I will do my best to make it up to you. Here's what we got. We're going to do a touchback on Jimmy Kimmel and the story of the worst censorship that's happened in America. Did Americans respond and support this man? You guys will be shocked to find out the answer. We're going to do a do-over. I think what we're seeing right now at the end of this summer of 2025 is a mulligan from 5 years ago. It's the first year of the Trump administration versus the last year of Trump 1.0, and there's a very interesting dichotomy being played out right now. A lot of the things that Trump promised previously are getting done right now. They're not getting done perfectly. I'm not necessarily crazy about the way that they're going about it all. But it is a concerted effort to really retouch a bunch of these bases, these issues that got left in the dust at the end of the last Trump administration. And maybe he would have done them in 2021 had he gotten another shot at it. I also kind of think that we got a mulligan on the Trump administration game because I think that he would have probably been cowed into submission. We watched the way that the end of the Trump administration filled out at like the end of 2020, right? There was a compliance with BLM. There was this instinct that we shouldn't push too hard. And then after 4 years of Biden, we're seeing kind of a different touch. I don't hate it. I don't think it's perfect. I think we should always criticize where we can and try to get the ball rolling in the way that we expect it to, because we're the voters. They work for us. They, our federal agencies, our federal politicians, and so on. And yet, I don't know. It seems like they're doing a better job. Mostly because I got to watch a bunch of Portland protester a-holes get like got their business rocked. I'm trying to say this without swearing. So we're going to get into that. Some FBI agents were fired on Friday afternoon. That was kind of interesting. Get into that story, something I've been covering for literally years at this point. I may have been the original agitator on that story, and I brought it up as soon as I became a public figure. And yeah, we're going to do a bunch more. So we're going to start off with the folks over at Undertac. That's where I'm going to lead off with today. And some of you guys may know this already. But the best day starts with the best underwear. Is that wrong? Is that a weird way of looking at it? Go to Undertac, UNDERTAC, undertac.com, and use promo code Kyle20 to get yourself 20% off anything in the store there. They have men's and they have women's. All right? They have some of the most comfortable undies, and I say that as someone who's worn the same types of undies for about 16 years now, and they've changed my mind on it. The summer's coming to an end. It doesn't mean that the heat and the humidity have stopped. That's why we've switched over here in the Seraphin house to Undertac. They have the leading edge of premium comfort and function. Forget your old boxer brief, especially if you're an old boxer brief. What are you doing? Undertac was built for special forces missions in brutal conditions. They can handle a little bit of Texas lawn mowing. They have a premium modal fabric, which weigh moisture better than cotton by 50%. It's naturally antibacterial. That's the stink part of it. They give you something cool, dry, chafe-free, and whether you're crushing a workout or you're just owning your day, whether you're hanging out on your couch because you got your comfy undies on, you can do that too, as long as nobody else has got the windows open. They're functional. They've got a hidden E&E pocket. That's for holding on to cash or a micro SD card or a handcuff key or whatever it needs. An extra almond if you're Steve Friend. Undertac is more than just boxer briefs. They've got a battle weave merino wool socks. I've been wearing those in the gym as well. I don't care about having high socks because I have high motivation. I want comfy feet. They're 5 times stronger than regular merino wool. They are rugged and they have soft everyday t-shirts. They've got all kinds of things, hoodies, joggers, you name it. Check them out now. 20% off site-wide. Undertac.com. Promo code KYLE20. Easy enough to remember. Kyle and 20 will get you 20% off site-wide. Check out Undertac. The link is in the show description, folks. You will not be disappointed. I've been very pleased with all the stuff that I've worn from them so far, and I'm sure that we'll continue on as the weather gets cooler here. All right, let's get into today's program right now. Don't ever forget about our sponsors. They're always easily to find in the link below. Let's do a Monday morning show here. Let's talk about a mulligan. All right, round one, part one, first story right off the bat. I didn't even add it to one of our presentations here. This came from the Gateway Pundit. Sugar high just 3 days after Jimmy Kimmel. You guys remember that guy? He was the defender of freedom and the First Amendment by making jokes about MAGA and getting his facts wrong. Just 3 days after his comeback, his ratings have crashed by about 70%. 3 days after Democrats and the media made a huge deal. Again, we said maybe that was the whole point in the first place, to go and see, could we get a little durable ratings bump for this guy? And it turns out that his ratings have evaporated since the beginning of the week. He returned to air. His ratings have dropped by 70%. The much hyped return was little more than hype. A sugar high lasts longer, says the Gateway Pundit. That is not a good sign. Now, they are going to return him to some of the Sinclair affiliates, but the claim was, here you go. So Wednesday night ratings, you had Gutfeld with 3.2 million cumulative, and you had Jimmy Kimmel with 2.4. That's a drop off because the day before that he had 6.3 million. And I assume it will continue to fall and fall. So just saying, remember when there's, what was that? Just remember when there's media hype. Is it Monday or what? Just remember when there's media hype like this and they're all crying about something that is obviously going to be a big problem, we know that it's going to land and be about as durable. Yeah, about as durable as something cheap from Walmart that just falls right apart. Okay, I listened to this morning. Speaking of people that are produced, people that are selling something, you know they're selling something because the pitch is polished. You ever get that phone call where they call in and if they have this real smooth opening and they say something, and then you say something really weird and then they're derailed and they don't know where to go with that? I do this with telemarketers all the time and I can't tell you what I say. I just like randomly will say something weird that doesn't fit into whatever their protocol is. I'll ask them a question or so on. I feel like Scott McFarlane from CBS is one of those guys. This is what I woke up to, and I must follow him over on social media because this was the first thing that I saw this morning when I opened up my phone. I like it. I like it because what we're doing is, as we talk about re-adjudicating 2020, as we talk about a mulligan for the BLM protest, which I don't think were handled very well, both at the local level or the federal level, having been a part of it in multiple different jurisdictions. I'm also seeing people kind of like try to push things that can't be real. We watched this weird push where Kash Patel tried to roll back a press release that happened on Friday. You recall there was this story the Blaze ran, and then you had some other people go out there and talk about 274 FBI agents were quote unquote embedded in the crowd on January 6th. If 2020 was the mulligan, the culmination of that sort of bad decision theater was January 6th. And then the federal rollout, because that was the actual tail end of Trump's first administration, right up until January 20th. So the first J6ers were arrested on Trump's watch. That's worth knowing. What's crazy is that no matter what information comes out, everybody immediately gathers a side. So the left goes out and says, oh, it's totally crazy. Like our federal people are our favorite, except that we really hate them when they're part of ICE and they're doing immigration enforcement. But they were really good under Biden. And this is a totally new game. It's all the same game. It's always the same people that are doing this stuff. It just turns out the orders at the top make a difference. Here's Scott McFarlane giving you a welcome to Monday, which is kind of funny. I don't know. Is this what you guys are looking for? Do you want like something falling apart and randomly hitting the wrong song button? Or would you like this kind of blah, 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 nonsense? Listen.
Hey, good morning. It's Scott McFarlane. It's Monday. That was way too short of a weekend, but we're back at it for the big week ahead. But this day and this week start in a place I wouldn't have imagined a few days ago. But again, we're talking about conspiracy theories and really bold claims about the U.S. Capitol attack in January 6th, including this allegation that the 200 plus FBI agents who were deployed to respond and help stop the pillaging of the Capitol were somehow there before the attack began and somehow a part of inciting January 6th.
I'm going to pause it with him on the screen. So the problem with the folks on the right that jump at every single opportunity without the facts behind it, the problem with saying things like 274 means that they were there to set up this event. I'm going to pose a question to you, and I want you to consider it I want you to consider it as logically as possible, without emotion, because January 6th is an emotional event for a lot of people. Consider this. If you were planning an operation, let's say, and you wanted to really be successful with compartmentalization, knowing everything you know, let's say it's just from watching spy movies, and let's say you didn't have a training or a background in intelligence or operations planning. Let's say you weren't in the military. You weren't doing gray and deniable ops. Would you have the FBI, the overt federal law enforcement agency that has significant amounts of oversight and is regularly having the director pulled out in front of members of Congress for hearings? Would you have them both quarterback and create the event to set up whatever your scheme was, and then simultaneously also make them the people that had to investigate and respond to it? Or would you, as I've said here many times, and I think this is the more likely thing, would you farm out potential nefarious deeds to other and maybe deniable governmental agencies? I've always told you that DHS is kind of a black bag when it comes to what they can and what they can't do. And people that are assigned to DHS temporarily, maybe they have some additional authorities. Why would you want to put FBI agents who are regularly required to go and be under oath and who aren't necessarily particularly good liars, just in my experience? Why would you put those people on the front line inside of a crowd to rile them up and then turn around and ask those exact same people in the exact same office that would know those people, have them do the prosecutions? Does that make any sense to you? This is the problem with jumping on the first narrative that you hear, because I saw people that are otherwise credible and intelligent human beings immediately jump to some sort of like unsupportable and unsubstantiated claims. It doesn't make any sense. I'm fairly confident that the number, and this is the other reason, why was the document that was released, why was it created in the first place? Because we need to actually know that. The vast majority of FBI agents, in my experience, are pretty conservative leaning. Maybe they're libertarian, maybe they're apolitical altogether, but they tend to be a kind of a political, right of center group. And the reason you know that is because they go to church, they join the military, they want to be in law enforcement in the first place. I do think that the left lean from the FBI comes from the intel community. But it's strange to imagine that you'd have a bunch of people do something that they know would be against their own interest and principles and then turn around and then they would investigate it with vigor. You really need to have plausible deniability in this sort of scenario. So what Scott McFarlane is going to set up is, I think, a straw man argument. They're running this red herring of, hey, look at 274. These people are all part of the conspiracy theory. Just because the way that he lays it out probably didn't happen and the way that people on the right have jumped on it didn't happen doesn't mean that there were not federal assets engaged in inciting people. I just don't think that everybody has found the right department. It's kind of like when you go out and say the CIA did everything. It's usually because you don't know what the CIA does or who it might have been. There's other intel services. There's 17 intel services in the United States government. So to just broadly refer to them as the CIA makes you technically wrong, and therefore you're vulnerable to criticism. Here he's going to go out and lay out something that I think is one of the dumbest arguments, but I wanted to just give you guys that sort of interjection.
The boldness of those claims aside, for
So
those
bold.
who've gone through every case file, all 1,500 plus U.S. Capitol riot prosecutions, talking about tens of thousands of pieces of paper, you just don't see it. You don't see evidence presented that somehow there was this Fed-surrection. And that was borne out in the criminal cases, wasn't it? Because in 100% of the jury trials of January 6 rioters, there were convictions. There were hundreds and hundreds of guilty pleas, people who acknowledged what they did on January 6th. There were convictions by judges, including Trump-appointed judges.
So he goes and leans on Trump-appointed judges. He leans on the fact that people pled out. For those of you who are not familiar with the way that the federal law enforcement system works, it's over 90% conviction rate in some way, shape, or form. people don't actually get a fair trial in the federal. Well, let's be wrong. Some people do not get a fair trial because they are overwhelmed by how much the cost is, the capabilities, and what is being presented to them. So they plea out to a lesser charge because they're overcharged. And that is all an incentivized system. I quote Bill Shipley here regularly. I don't agree with a lot of stuff Bill Shipley says, but I do agree with this. The government's job is supposed to be process and not be interested in outcome. What we saw on January 6th, for people that had never experienced the legal system before, is that there was this vested interest in coming out with an outcome. And when they went for outcome, they overcharged, people pled to lesser charges, and they got the 90%. Federal prosecutors do not want to have, acquittals unless they decide to go up against like a Mark Houck. You guys are asking, who is this guy? This is a mainstream presenter for CBS. I like the word presenter because I don't think he's a reporter. He's clearly saying his opinions about stuff. And he's even referencing there were Trump-appointed judges on the bench, as though that somehow changes the game. Once you're inside that system, the system is very circular. It serves itself. It doesn't necessarily serve those that are being accused and brought before it. I don't think there was any justice for January 6ers. I think that the people that were involved in assault on federal law enforcement got heavier sentences than normal. I think people who weren't even there got insane sentences because there was a predetermined outcome. And that a lot of that has to do with the way that we are now looking at this Jim Comey scenario. There are people that want retribution, and I think I understand that instinct. My answer is that even though that probably feels good, it would be far better for us to break down this system and this weapon than just wield it for a little while. And I'm going to continue to make that argument. I just want to finish the last little thing that he says, which is funny because it reminded me of Portland, and we're going to touch on that as well during this mulligan.
In bench trials, there were precious few acquittals on charges. What's more, the crowd that was there that day, the riotous mob, to have been incited, they sure did come equipped for what happened.
This is the best. Ready?
Among the things January 6 rioters carried that day: bear spray, some had knives, a tomahawk axe in at least one case, bats, hockey sticks, lacrosse sticks, pipes, Confederate flags, and in some cases, guns.
Guns! Oh my God, they had lacrosse sticks and hockey sticks and pipes and Confederate flags, guys. A tomahawk axe, whatever the hell a tomahawk axe is. Can you imagine? There are more capable and more deadly guns and other assorted weapons in my bedroom. In my bedroom right now than there were in the entirety of the crowd that went into the Capitol. I don't have any Confederate flags, which I don't know how they're deadly, but Confederate flags. Can you imagine? There were a couple of guns in the crowd. There was like a guy with a revolver, but the real serious people that would have seriously brought guns, that seriously wanted to take over the Capitol, didn't show up. They didn't. It wasn't there. There were guns in the crowd from law enforcement officers and from federal agents. And, one of those Capitol Police officers who decided to shoot an unarmed veteran in the face, which I think was one of those things that should be revisited. We're talking past each other. And we're out of reality here. And so as we enter this interesting sort of swing back where we're getting a second touch at Portland, we're getting a second touch at BLM injustices and at the FBI, where people are now trying to get a little bit of transparency. Let's remember what we don't have. What we don't have is an honest accounting from all of the government agencies of who the hell was involved in what. What were the DOD assets that were on the ground? What were the DHS assets that were on the ground? Those are two different departments outside of DOJ. I think DOJ has been pretty thoroughly, adjudicated. The questions have been asked and answered, and maybe some people were able to fudge around the corners. There's a story that we're going to cover in a minute about Chris Wray, and is he going to be someone? He's been conspicuously quiet, and I think rightly so. Smart move on his part to be quiet about all this. But we need to ask the question, what other departments were there? Because if you're not asking all of the assets that we have, both the deniable and the ones that are accountable, you're not going to get the real story. And you're going to peg your hopes on 274 FBI agents who, as far as we can tell, and I've been talking to Steve Baker over the weekend about this too, there is almost no evidence of FBI agents showing up in some sort of plain clothes. There's no such thing as an FBI uniform, so I'm in plain clothes right now. If I were to put a plate carrier on, I'd still be in plain clothes. If I were to show up and look like Let's see what I got here. If I showed up and looked like this is what I look like in Portland in 2020. For you who have never seen this, it's kind of funny. I'm at an In-N-Out. I was doing surveillance. We went and got some lunch. This is one of my teammates who I blacked out his face because he's still working. That was it. It was like, that's plain clothes. I had a neck gaiter on because it was 2020 and there was a lot of stupidity in Portland. You had to have it to be able to go up to, to order food. And there I am. It also was useful for my job because I needed to conceal my face sometimes. And then there we are. I've got a plaid shirt on. That's plain clothes. If I were to put a plate carrier on, I would be overtly marked as FBI, but I also would have still been quote unquote plain clothes, as you heard. Now, as I was talking to Steve Baker about all this stuff, there was almost no evidence of FBI agents going up to skirmish lines, showing their badge or credentials, and then joining in the fray. Okay? That's just what it is. It didn't happen. So the odds are that 274 that we heard about on Friday, it wasn't a bunch of people that were embedded in the crowd to get them all riled up. Again, use the process of elimination. Use your most honest thinking head and think, would you really want the same people that are going to go and investigate and have to sit up on the stand setting those folks up? Or would you rather use a different deniable organization and then have your FBI operate in quote unquote good faith? It's like, well, we know we didn't set this thing up. My guess to you is that 274 number not only included the SWAT team members who responded, of which there was probably 50 or 60 in that. You had your comms people responding. So there's another dozen there. You have your evidence response people. That could be 40, 50, 60 people in that alone. But a lot of it was the investigators that came in after the fact that were asking questions. We know for a fact that a third of the Washington field office was required to deploy, but they couldn't get there because all the roads were blocked up. So they didn't actually make it on scene. And so remember who created that document. The document that said that there were 274 agent specific were looking for something. And they weren't looking to expose their undercover operations to help overthrow the MAGA movement. I promise you that's not what they were interested in. That was generated under Biden as an after action. What that was an accountability saying, look how many resources we deployed to this thing. Look how much more funding we're going to need. The simplest answer for government is, how does it benefit me? I just want you guys to be thinkers when you see this stuff. And then we start talking about the narrative about violence. And the narrative of violence is ongoing, and it is happening in multiple different areas right now. There's a story at CBS. This was their 60 Minutes piece. After Charlie Kirk's murder, the Utah governor, Spencer Cox, grapples with rising political violence. Again, they're very non-specific about this thing. Americans have condemned political violence as inflammatory rhetoric. The people are upset. They're angry. They're nauseous in disbelief. This is the Republican governor of Utah. And he's saying that he decried political violence against both Democrats and Republicans. And he focused on an opportunity for all Americans to disagree in nonviolent ways. I'm not asking people to hold hands and hug it out. I'm just saying stop shooting each other. Well, that's a reasonable thing to say. But we have this moment where people could all, quote unquote, come together. But you got folks on the left that just can't really let it go. They can't just be like, hey, this was someone from, quote unquote, our side, and we need to really decry that. This happened on CNN last night, night before last, I think. Scott Jennings, this lib guy, they're going to have a discussion about what is violent, who is violent. And I think that leads into another little sort of piece of evidence I have from Bill Maher talking about, you hear about the issue with Islam and violence. And it's not that all people that are Islamic have an instinct towards violence. It's just that the people that are not necessarily violent don't really decry and cast out those who do. I think the political left has that same problem. We're going to go ahead and evaluate that for just a second.
Yeah, I'm pretty tired of conservatives gaslighting about the current political environment and Donald Trump's rhetoric when all of this escalation can be traced back to his entrance into American politics. His claim to fame was saying that Obama wasn't born in America. He was the first presidential candidate to have his crowd chant, "Lock her up," about a political opponent. You can bring up the insurrection. Even in the past few weeks, my home city of Chicago, he posted a photo of Chicago being invaded by the Department of War. So the broader point here is Donald Trump endlessly deflects and tries to blame it on the other side when he is the one responsible for amping up the tension in America. And I've spent all of my formative years throughout high school, throughout college, looking to the president, who I'm supposed to be able to look up to, and seeing somebody who's trying to place blame on the left, who's amping up the rhetoric constantly. And yeah, it's not good.
So you think it's Donald Trump's fault that a deranged leftist climbed up to the top of a building and shot up the ICE facility, not once now, but twice in Texas?
I think it's Donald Trump's fault that America has gotten to this heated place. I think that
no responsibility for the radicalization on the left that's causing this violent outburst.
That 29-year-old is radicalized by online communities and online algorithms. I'm not going to blame that directly on Trump, but he was caught in a lot of online video game algorithms and all these communities. Donald Trump,
but it's Trump's
10
fault.
years ago, Donald Trump amped up the tension in America.
So he ran 10 years ago, and this guy then 10 years later, somehow you're connecting. Can't you just take responsibility for it?
Oh,
on the left.
But let's not do the he has to take responsibility because he's a Democrat.
I'm a 22-year-old YouTuber. You want me to take more responsibility than the president of the United States?
It always devolves into that. Let me go back to a premise that we introduced last week. I think that it is really useful for framing these thoughts. When you see people on the left and on the hard left that want to make excuses for the left, what do they always seem to do? They blame systems. They're happy to blame Donald Trump too, individually. Like one person individually can take responsibility. But it's always the system's fault because the person is inherently good. It's not that person's fault. They fell into YouTube algorithms and Reddit and video games. As opposed to saying, sometimes people do really bad things. Conservatives believe that we are fallen creatures, that we come from a place of original sin, that there was pride introduced into the world, and therefore there's been suffering ever since. If you're on the left, people are sort of like utopian ideals, even though there's no evidence of that being true. It's this very sophomoric, sort of juvenile belief that people are inherently good, and it's these systems that keep failing them. And every time I see it, it's really good to come from a 22-year-old YouTuber who said my formative years in high school and college. If you're 22 years old and you're a man, like a young man in America, you don't know anything. Like there are so few of them that do. I knew one guy that had his SHIT together at that age. One. Only one of all my friends. And my friends were absolutely like the top tier of America's intellectual talent. My friends had tens of millions, like a dozen guys had tens of millions of dollars in scholarship offers. So by all the accounts of what people cared about for like kids, they were sports studs. They were intellectually capable. They were getting scholarships to go to college. They were all going to be super successful. And then guess what? Like none of them had their business together. Not one of them. And the one that everyone sort of looked at in my group of friends and said, hey, that's the one guy who's made a really goofy mistake. He's one of the best people in the entire world as far as I'm concerned. He got out and dropped out of college and got married right away and had a baby and then went back to college and he's been providing for his family. He's an empty nester right now. He's an empty nester and he's my age. And I have a 2-year-old. He figured it out. I think that 22-year-old men in America oftentimes are like the worst people to listen to. So listening to that guy have a very juvenile understanding of the world, it makes perfect sense to me. Here's kind of an older guy who's saying the same thing that Scott Jennings is. When Scott Jennings, who's kind of like center right, and Bill Maher, who's kind of like an old school, he's like a classic liberal, we can agree with sometimes. If they're saying the same thing, they're probably saying something that most Americans can get behind.
The basic problem we have in America is conservatives think the liberals are insane, and they're not completely wrong. Now, I don't think most liberals are insane, but neither do they make it clear they disapprove of the ones who are, and their cowardice in not marginalizing their own crazies has been their downfall. I couldn't get Neil deGrasse Tyson, a genius scientist and preeminent scientific voice in the media, to agree that it was ridiculous for Scientific American and The Atlantic to be claiming that separating sports by sex doesn't make sense. Yes, it does. Actually, it makes perfect sense. And it's obvious that it does. And there's a lot of stuff like that on the left. And when conservatives see it, they say, I'm sorry, we're just not going to go along with reinventing society, often pointlessly, even if we have to cancel democracy to do it. That's what they're saying. They see gender as only a construct and sex is assigned at birth, and they say, we're not doing that. Transing kids by self-diagnosis with no age limit, no parental notification, and no acknowledgement of social contagion, not doing it. Asylum now covers any reason for anyone to come to America, not doing it. Homelessness is a lifestyle. Natural immunity doesn't count anymore. Whiteness is toxic. Penises in women's prisons. Welcoming the Intifada. We're not doing it.
I think penises in women's prisons is my new favorite expression. I don't know where he decided to throw that out there, but it's pretty good. Right? Isn't that the thing? This is the do-over. This is the touch. We watched the insanity sort of get a strong foothold in 2020. And it was insane. It was insane that people burned American cities over the injustice of a guy overdosing on drugs underneath a taught and authorized police hold tactic. Anyone who's ever seen the truth about what happened with George Floyd knows. The guy was claiming that he had difficulty breathing prior to getting on the ground. He was in the back of the car. Why was he on the ground in the first place? Because he wouldn't sit still long enough to be in the back of the squad car that they had, or the SUV they were trying to shackle him in. The guy committed a crime. He was in the midst of having a fentanyl overdose. What is fentanyl but an opiate? And what are opiates but respiratory depressants? So people have difficulty breathing. It's actually very common. You usually don't get to see it happen in that slow period of time, but I'm guessing that he probably had a pretty high tolerance. And then they burned cities over it. And they got this crazy movement behind them that raised millions and millions of dollars from corporations. And that allowed a bunch of other crazy stuff to happen. We've got a chance to retouch that, I think. I say that as somebody who actually was in Portland in 2020, September of 2020. Like right now, let's call it 5 years ago, I was sitting and taking pictures like this. What you're seeing on the screen, this is a great reason, by the way, for you guys to have Spotify. If you don't use Spotify, you can't just switch between video and audio. But if you're listening and you're not seeing this, you're missing out on some visuals that came from my actual surveillance camera while I was actually in Portland working for the FBI. On the left side, closest to me, is a guy who looks like he's out of a Mad Max movie. The graininess is because I had a cheaper iPhone back then, but the guy was wearing a handmade leather vest with a scabbard that had a sword that was made from rebar, and it looked like it was welded together. The thing was probably 4+ feet long. It was rusty. It was pointy on one end. It was not sharpened. It was this like cudgel, ridiculous, weird weapon. He's wearing a bandana and sunglasses, and he's stomping around with patches and he's a LARPer. He was sleeping on cardboard in a parking spot that I had to pay $20 a night to park in for my government vehicle, and he was sleeping there for nothing while I was sleeping in the nicest hotel in Portland, which was available at government rates, which meant it was under $100 a night. Normally like between $400 and $500 a night, but because Portland is so jacked up, I could actually afford there on the government rate. And next to it, what you're seeing was called the snack van. It was one of the subjects of our investigations out there. The snack van was a graffitied Sprinter van full of snacks to be able to feed rioters. And it has the word or the letters BLM on it and a bunch of other crazy stuff. It had the ACAB, all cops are bastards. It had the FUCK 1-2 and a bunch of other sort of nonsensical anarchist and BLM type, rioting stuff. The reason that people lumped BLM and Antifa together is because the Antifa folks said, you are ideologically aligned with us. We're just going to be more violent than you, and we're going to use you for cover. And so they did. And so you're seeing right now this complaint about Portland not wanting, quote unquote, Trump troops sent in. This is the same exact signs that we saw in 2020. 5 years ago today, I saw signs up in windows, federal troops go home, despite the fact that Portland desperately needed somebody to come in and clean it up because the people that were in their city were not doing it. So we're not going to accept the craziness. And if you're going to burn down cities over a black criminal who died of a drug overdose, then you might also think that other crazy things are possible. Like maybe we should just let women do men's jobs, or we should put men inside women's locker rooms. All of this stuff is problematic. This was a hearing that was just done with Pete Hegseth. I think that seeing this touch, this is the pushback that Bill Maher was saying. It's like, we're just not going to accept the crazy as much anymore. It's not coming in a perfect manner. And it's probably not even going to achieve the things that everybody wants in the end, but it is going to give us at least a slight pushback against something that, maybe will take a little bit more ground. I don't think we're taking the hill, folks. But this stuff has to happen because we have to have these conversations. And then you're going to have to win it over by being reasonable with those around you. And that's going to be the really hard part. Let the loud movers be loud. You cannot accept false statements to be said in your presence and not say anything back. I told you guys that this is what a cultural crusade would look like. The cultural crusade looks like your family member, your friend, your person at work says something that is over the top radical leftist. And you're just like, I don't agree with that. You don't even have to be mean. You say, I don't agree with what you just said. That's not true. You don't have to make an argument even. You just have to tell them that what they're saying so that somebody in their circle lets them know that you are not in a consensus of everybody agreeing with you. This is Pete Hegseth essentially doing that.
Because if it were, you would be keeping these women in. Instead, you are the one injecting culture wars into the military, and it's at the detriment of our military readiness and national security. Now, General Kane, I'd like to turn to you.
So to be clear, these are men who think they're women.
These are women. I'm happy to educate you on
but these are men.
On trans issues at another
what we've
time.
identified is that there's mental health issues with that belief system.
I'd like to turn to General
are
Kane
detrimental
now.
to readiness, and that's the determination that we've made and that we stand behind. Gender dysphoria.
And so you don't.
Okay, we're not going to let you just say that men are women and women are men. We're just not going to let you do it. You can't do that anymore. You don't get to say crazy nonsense. But we should also be really careful to police things that happen on the right, on things that people want to believe right away. What's the thing that people want to believe right now? Someone takes a pot shot. Someone goes and attacks a church. Is it always left-wing violence? Is it always some sort of craziness that has something specifically to do with politics? Probably not. It turns out there's a lot of people that are very flawed and broken in this country. There's a lot of mental illness, and it doesn't necessarily align with one politic or another. Right now, we had 2 shootings over the weekend that were pretty significant and pretty troubling for folks that are paying attention to this. I think that random violence is something that we are going to find out more about, and we're going to see more of it. In the same way that if we're revisiting 2020, we can correct some of the wrongs, we're also going to see some of the sporadic and random violence. The question is, how do we react to it? This is a story from ABC. Investigators are probing the motive for a Michigan LDS church shooting and fire. At least 4 people were killed at the LDS church in Grand Blanc, which is in Michigan. This happened the other day. Gunman named Thomas Jacob Sanford, 40 years old, drove his truck into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Michigan on a Sunday morning, began shooting congregants, set the building on fire. All of this stuff is horrific. 4 people killed, 8 others injured in the shooting. There was questions about what the shootout happened because some people were armed and they decided to respond. You also had law enforcement get involved. The FBI is calling it a targeted attack of violence, perhaps. But it doesn't mean that it was necessarily left-wing terrorism that caused this to be the case. And so this idea, you guys may have seen this. There's a, what's his name? There's a Saturday Night Live clip, and I think it's like Shane Gillis. He does this bit where they're like claiming, the newscasters are claiming whether the blacks or whites, they're claiming whether it's our people or your people are responsible for the violence. The left and the right are playing that game in America right now. Every time there's a story about something horrific, the question is can we say this was a trans shooter? Can we say this was a left-wing loony? Was this an Antifa? Was this a BLM activist? Is it possible that sometimes bad things just happen because people are broken and they have mental problems? I would say yes. Here's a man named Chris. His name is Chris Johns. He supposedly talked to the guy who was actually involved in the shooting a couple days prior. And it sounds like he was just upset with LDS. There are a lot of people that don't like Mormons. I'm not actually one of them. I understand that I think that it's kind of cultish and that it's not necessarily what Christianity is. But I've found that Mormon people tend to be really, really nice. They come and knock on your door and they want to try to sell you their story. And it's like, invite them in and have a cup of coffee, talk to them about the Bible, explain to them that you're not interested in Joseph Smith, and they don't get mad at you. One of my best buddies in the FBI, Mormon guy. We used to talk about what was and what was not and why and where the root was, why they couldn't drink coffee, what the issues were with tobacco. And he was totally honest about it. He's like, yeah, this is just what we believe. Does it make tons of sense to me all the time? No, but this is my religion. This is, the whole system of beliefs as a whole, it works. And guess what? He's happily married. He's a conservative dude. He's a military stud and a hero, right? He's the kind of person that stands up. He worked in Portland for the FBI for a little while. And he was hated there because he had principles. And he spilled blood for this country, a lot of it. Like, he's a really deadly human being, and he's the kind of guy you want on your side. So am I going to turn away and say, Mormon people in general? No, I'm not. But I can also say that certain people crack and they demonize something that is different from themselves. And when they do that, like, we need to call that stuff out too. It's like, hey, man, you don't have to love Mormon people, but I tell you what, they're probably not going to come and violently come after you. This guy had this interview. This is looks like a local affiliate. This is Dave Bondi. Maybe you guys know who Dave Bondi is. I actually don't, but I saw this clip and I thought, how interesting to find that you randomly encountered this dude and you might actually have the motive, and the motive has nothing to do with one politics or another. It has to do with the guy getting mentally ill and probably fixating on something.
Hello, everyone. I'm talking to Chris right now, and you contacted me a short time ago, pretty distraught because actually, earlier today, you came to the realization that you say that you talked to the person who did this horrible thing in Grambling Township.
I did last week. It was Wednesday or Thursday. I'm running for city council and I'm canvassing, and I had an address on my map that I went to, and I came across a gentleman. He was very friendly, and he had interacted positively with me, and we got out of the vehicle. We started just to talk, and after a short while, the conversation went to the Church of Latter-day Saints, Mormonism, and he just made the position multiple times that Mormons are the Antichrist. And he, in not so many terms, said that several times. He gave me his background, but I just walked away from a person who had some very sharp views about Mormons.
Yeah, so you were just out campaigning for the election in November coming up, I'm assuming?
That is correct.
And so you're just shaking hands, looking to meet people. You come across his door. Have you matched it up? Is it the address the same as this person? Have you looked?
It is, yes. I mean, it is not only the address, but it's also the person that I spoke with. I have a friend in Utah who is involved with the LDS Church. I sent him a voice message saying I had a conversation with a person who had very sharp views, and it's just like you come across a lot of different people while you campaign.
Yeah.
And I shared this with him on Friday, and then we had our Sunday dinner, and I ended up seeing a photo. That was the exact guy I spoke to last week.
So it doesn't necessarily always have to be the pattern that we hope it is. And I think that we have to confront our own confirmation bias. I'm looking at the story right here, which comes from CNN. And it says 4 people were killed, 8 were wounded, others are unaccounted for. The chapel joins, amongst others, a Minneapolis Catholic church, a Pittsburgh synagogue, a Sikh temple, all places where both young and old were killed. They were gathering for different reasons. So you're talking about Sikhs, you're talking about Jews, you're talking about Catholics, you're talking about Mormons. To celebrate the start of a new school year, to mourn the loss of a leader, blah, blah, blah. They were all doing this thing. They're all praying, and they all had violence. But it doesn't mean that they're actually related. It doesn't mean that the reasons that people went there are the same. We want to put things into nice little easy boxes, but that doesn't actually work in our regular life. People don't actually tend to fit in nice little boxes. And occasionally decent, otherwise nice, hardworking people will just go and snap. And they do something that is completely illogical. And what is the most common thing you hear? He was such a nice man. He always kept to himself. I had no idea that he would ever do this. There are plenty of stories like that that used to be the most common thing that you would hear on the nightly news when they would do these things. I just want you to consider, break the bias when you hear something. If your first instinct is to say, I hope it's somebody that did this thing that I disagree with, that's the wrong instinct. That's not going to get us where we want to be. And we all do it. I do it. You do it. I assure you, the news media does it. The difference is their voice is really loud, and we need to be very critical. We need to look at them for the propaganda that they are slinging in the way that they are slinging it, which is why I played you Scott McFarland, who told you in a very, very polished voice, this is exactly the way. Can you believe they had pipes and lacrosse sticks, and they had Confederate flags, and even a tomahawk axe and guns? Well, we've got tomahawk axes and guns here on this set, sitting right behind me, and they don't cause any problem for anybody. There's a will to act. That's what has to happen. And so again, if you're going to go out there and try to blame systems, you're probably on the left. If you're going to blame people individually, you probably are on the right. But don't be a person on the right who just says all these types of people are the problem. We should still be interested in people individually and not just do this process as the punishment. We're fine with it because they're probably on the wrong team. Can you guys tell that the word tomahawk axe really bothers me? It really does. All right, you know what doesn't bother me? Having a power grid go out because we have a Grid Doctor 3300 sitting right outside of my studio wall here, and it powers this particular broadcast. It's running through, giving us clean power in a universal or uninterrupted power supply. Have you looked at your power bill lately? Your electricity prices are probably at all-time highs. I know they are over here as well. They're only going up. And power outages are becoming more and more common because our grid is not keeping up with the people we have. The Department of Energy said blackouts could increase by over 10,000% over the next few years. If you don't have a backup generator for your home, it's time to get one. I've actually been thinking about this all the time. I'm like, oh man, how much of our life is actually tied to having electricity? If you're worried about something like that, You can actually put a one-time investment in and really solve that problem, which is what we have here. At least in the worst case scenario, I can both have power and I can recharge it on a solar generator. We've got the Grid Doctor 3300 sitting right outside here. You can get one from My Patriot Supply. The website is mypatriotsupply.com/KYLE. mypatriotsupply.com/Kyle. Here's the deal. It's fume free. Unlike a gas generator or a propane generator or a diesel generator, you can use it indoors. You can run one of their long cables. We've got a 75-foot, I think, or maybe a 100-foot cable. It has a flat space to go underneath your door where you can actually set up your solar panels outside and then keep your Grid Doctor indoors, keeping it out of the sun and giving it like the ability to hook up to it. You've got all these different little plug outlets in there and whatnot. You don't have to run extension cords all over your house for things that are critical. You can just run one little kind of clean cord. mypatriotsupply.com/KYLE. And right now they're doing a deal. If you guys need to finance one, if this is something that you're panicking about and you don't have the money up front, if you want to, you can actually finance it for zero down with as little as $104 a month. I'm not usually a big fan of financing things, but if you're in a position where you're like, hey, this is the time where I can budget it out responsibly, you can get 3,300 watts of backup power delivered to your door for as little as $0 down. Again, mypatriotsupply.com/KYLE. Be responsible, guys. Check something out and make sure that you are, I don't know, insulating yourself against whatever this stuff looks like. Stuff looks like, running out of power. Okay, we're going to do another quick story here about violence because I want to get into this further. This is another random story that we found out. Again, multiple people covering the story in Michigan. The other one was a shooting that took place in North Carolina at a waterfront bar. Subject was arrested, left 3 people dead, 8 others injured. Very similar as far as death, the numbers of death and the numbers of people injured. It's this little coastal town called Southport, North Carolina. Guy used a quote-unquote assault rifle. Could you tell I'm looking at mainstream news? The suspect's from Oak Island, North Carolina. He's been charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. This is a local crime. You didn't see the FBI getting involved because it's not a church. Truly sad stuff. And again, both of these guys are military veterans. We find out that there's probably some PTSD or maybe some trauma involved in there. This plays into all kinds of narratives if you want to just lump people in and not consider them, if you only want to look at them as a group. I saw a sarcastic remark in our chat earlier. Yeah, military veterans are dangerous. Well, maybe so, because they have some of these skills. It was a joke from one of our chatters. We want to find an easy answer and an easy solution, but it turns out life is pretty messy. And again, if you have a confirmation bias where you want to do something like, I don't know, like what Janet Reno wanted to do, wasn't she famous for saying something to that effect? That we needed to make sure that we kept guns out of the hands of veterans? Like, well, who's more capable and competent using weapon systems than people that trained in our military? Probably not very many people, it turns out. We could be honest about certain things and say some people have broken from their experiences. Some people are going through difficulty. And we don't have to just lump everybody in together. We can have simultaneously a need to be able to arm ourselves against violent criminals that just do not care about what's going on in this country or do not care about being socialized. And at the same time, some people, we should try to make them safe. The answer is not more government, it turns out, if you're me. I don't think that's the answer. The answer is, how do we build up a community and a family so that when you see someone who's struggling, that we can actually step in and do something about this? Whose responsibility is it to make sure that a dangerous person or someone who's having like mental difficulties doesn't have access to weapons? Is it our government? Should they be screening us? Should they be checking every single thing that we write? Should they look through our emails and our text messages and try to find out, oh, we're going to keep track of all the crazies. We already know they can't do it. How do we know? Because this weekend, there were 2 guys that went on shooting sprees and killed strangers for various different reasons. We know they can't do it. Every single time that you guys hear, quote unquote, he was on the FBI's radar, some shooter at a school, some shooter in a mall, some shooter anywhere else, at a bar, at a church, he was on the radar. All that tells you is it affirms one thing and one thing only. It's not that the FBI is letting them go. It's that the government cannot solve this problem. You can't do it with red flag laws. You cannot do it by pre-crime and pre-thought. You can only do it through trying to help heal people around you. How many of these people could have been saved if somebody in their family had reached out on the day before and just said, hey man, how you doing? Hey, I want to come by. I haven't heard from you in a little bit. I want to stop in and just check in on you. How many people just like thought, I should pick up the phone and call that person that I've been, not hearing from. I've been kind of thinking about them, but I'm also really busy. It's our responsibility, it turns out. Your cops are not your babysitters. They're not your social workers. The people that work law enforcement at the state, federal, and at the local level, none of these people signed up to be a parent to an adult. And maybe they didn't need that. Maybe they just needed a buddy. I used to tell my wife that about counseling all the time. My wife is she has a master's degree in counseling. So she used to work as a marriage and family therapist. She used to work as a licensed professional counselor. And I used to tell her, all of your friends that need counseling, like a lot of them just need a friend. They don't need a strategy and they don't need some sort of way to fix this. They just need another human being that gives a rat's ass about how they do, that checks in on them periodically. Isn't that our responsibility? You don't have to necessarily be your brother's keeper, but shouldn't you just keep up with your brother, whoever that person is? We can't do it for everybody, but there's a small circle. If every one of us had a dozen people that we kept track of over a period of a month, which is what I used to do. If you have a commute home, some of it you can listen to this podcast. And some of it you can use to reach out and just talk to folks that you haven't talked to in a while. Put them on a schedule. Once a week, I check in with this person. Once a month, I check in with somebody who's a little bit further out on the list. I had a mental category of people that I checked in with. And so I have dozens of people that I keep track of over the many years of weird places that I've lived. Can we not be looking out for our neighbor? Not because we want to make sure that they don't do something bad, but because we care about them, that we want good outcomes. And it'll make you more empathetic to the rest of it. When I tell you guys that community is probably the answer here, that's what the crusade is going to look like, I think. The crusade is going to look like, how do we go out there and look after each other and build a societal structure that doesn't let people fall through? Not how do we legislate it and build government and put a bunch of sort of like, I don't know, law enforcement armed. You can't legislate your way out of this. You can't government your way out of this. It just doesn't work. That's just not the way that we're wired. We are trying to fix this 2020 thing. We do need to see an accountability happen. But I would argue that going after every single bad guy, and I know a lot of people want to see it, I think that time has probably passed. That time was probably 2017 when Trump 1.0 came in. And he set a precedent. We're not going to go after the Hillary Clintons. We're not going to lock her up. We could, but we're not going to. And it's a shame. It really is. I think that was a bad decision for this country. I think what it did is it gave this thing that one of my team sergeants used to talk about. Never mistake kindness for weakness. The left did that. And 2021 through 2025, the beginning of those 4 years of Biden were an opportunity for the left to mistake kindness for weakness. And they did it in a big, big way. And now they're really crying about it because they don't want to see the alternative. They don't want to see accountability happen. And in some ways, they're right. It's kind of like punishing your child like a week afterwards. If I was on a work vacation or a work vacation, if I was on a work trip, let's say I'm in Portland and I come back and I find out that my daughter 4 days ago, who at that time was 3 or 4 years old, if my daughter had done something bad and there wasn't a proximity to that bad action and I came back and punished her right away, it wouldn't have the desired effect. It's the same as seeing a puppy. It pees in the corner, and then an hour later, you beat the crap out of it. The puppy doesn't know that it's because it peed in the corner an hour ago. You really have to have your discipline, and you need to have your reactions happen proximate to the actual offense. And that's not necessarily the case. So I do see people on the left right now are completely bewildered. Like, what do you mean we're retouching 2020? The way to retouch 2020 is not going to be go back and punish everybody from the previous Trump administration or the ones before. That's my assessment, okay? You guys can disagree with me. I think the answer is to set policies up such that we don't make those same mistakes. And that's a little different. And we are seeing that happen in Portland right now. And I think that is the right answer. So here's the confusion that you're seeing on the political left right now.
People voted for him in huge part to bring costs down. The more they watch him focus on personal retribution. Yes, it motivates his base. Yes, it motivates the Democratic base. But for these voters in the middle who are looking for their cost of living to come down, for their lives to be better, they say, why are you not focused on what matters to me?
I'm stunned to hear you say we're now worried about normalizing this kind of thing. We had an attorney.
You are about to do right now. Let's hear it.
I'm about to tell you what happened in the state of New York when the Democratic Attorney General ran an entire political campaign promising not to uphold justice, but to prosecute one person, Donald Trump. And I didn't hear a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth among Democrats about normalizing the weaponization of justice. That chart you put up there, my question is, do they deserve it? If they didn't do anything wrong, I'm not certain anything bad is going to happen to them. Bolton, that started under Joe Biden. James, I mean, these people that you put on the screen, they may have something that needs to be looked at. But don't you have trust in the processes, grand juries? This is how the system works.
Okay, so a couple things can be true at once. If Comey lied to Congress and he technically committed a felony during that time, then he can be prosecuted. I get it. But isn't it interesting that all the people that were on the right that were looking for retribution and looking for correction, every single person I heard said the same darn thing. They said treason, sedition, conspiracy against rights. We're going to go after Jim Comey and we're going to get him for all the evil things he did. Here's the thing that is most unsettling. If all they could get him on was a false statement and the potential that he was obstructing justice with said false statements, it tells you something a little bit darker. It tells you that most of the things he did were actually legal. Not that they couldn't fall, that they were outside of the statute of limitations. No, they were actually legal within the parameters of the system that was created. So the answer is not like, oh, we should get him on a technicality. The answer is this system is the problem, and it has been the problem. And so if you fall on the side of the coin that I do as a conservative, where you say, I don't want weaponized anything, I don't weaponize government, then it tells you that the government is the actual issue. And then when they used it, they used that weapon appropriately for their own causes. That's really scary stuff. Consider this. What if you can't go after Obama because the things that Obama did were technically speaking legal and they were within the purview and the power that he had? The entire federal government was set up in an argument in the 1790s, the argument in the 1780s, the discussion was, how strong do we make it so it doesn't fall apart? And how weak can we keep it so it doesn't come after us and kill us? We have arrived at the point where the anti-federalists were correct, where the government has grown outside of its bounds. It needs to be trimmed aggressively to fit back in the box that it belongs in. The answer is not going to be going after the people that did stuff that we don't like on technicalities. The answer is going to be cutting back pieces of that machine that operate as they are designed, because if all you can do is find out that Jim Comey lied and was like inartful in one expression where he didn't believe that somebody was an FBI employee because they were an unpaid special governmental employee that he brought on because he was his buddy, all of that stuff is like majoring in the minors. You're dealing with minutia when the real problem is we have an FBI director who can order off the books honeypot operations into a current president. That's the real danger. I'm going to play you that again because we've seemed to have forgotten that. Before we do it, let me take a quick break here to remind you guys that you may hear an ad from Spotify right now. And you can find Spotify by going to KyleSerafinshow.com. I think that in the interim, if you are just listening to us, if you have never been able to see some of the video stuff, the ability to switch back and forth between audio and video, it's fantastic. If you're watching on one of the video platforms, no big deal. Make sure you're liking, make sure you're sharing it, make sure you're subscribing to our YouTube channel. Really appreciate that. We're almost at 14,000 over there, which means we're about halfway caught up with Rumble. And it's gotten a meteoric rise over this last year. It's been fantastic watching people join over on YouTube. So thank you for all the chatters that are on YouTube. You guys are great. Make sure you guys like the video before you leave. Same story over on Rumble. Appreciate you guys there. I want to show you this. This was something that got swept under the rug, and it's really problematic for one reason and one reason only. The people within the FBI got the ear of the FBI director. That's going to come into our next story. They got the ear of the FBI director and they said, this happened, but it's not what you think it was. It's not the problem. It was actually all okay. Those people were the mutual admiration societies that exist in the orbit of the FBI. So a lot of the danger and damages that have happened to the American psyche, and certainly people on the political right, historically it was always the left that was worried about the FBI. Isn't that funny? And now the right is. If you zoom out far enough, a reasonable person says the FBI has always been a problem. It just goes after whatever serves itself. The mutual admiration societies are the Society of Ex-FBI Agents, or SOC ex-FBI, and the FBI Agents Association, or FBIAA. Those groups are captured. And I think that they are roughly Marxist organizations at this point. But they exist for one reason and one reason only: mutual admiration. They love the FBI because the FBI loves them. And the entire purpose of those groups are to maintain contact with and influence over the FBI's director. And that's why you got a backpedaling after a very salacious story went out in the Washington Times. Kerry Pickett covered it. Kash Patel quashed it on the advice of the FBI Agents Association and SOCX FBI. The Mutual Admiration Societies killed this story, which was covered by Fox. Listen to how breathless they are and how scandalous this sounds. And then we're going to get into the BLM firing that happened over on a Friday afternoon.
President Trump's first campaign by using 2 undercover agents in a so-called honeypot operation?
Incredible.
Todd Pyro joins us with details. Todd.
This is big. Under the leadership of new FBI Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino, the Bureau has reportedly launched an investigation into the agency's plan to infiltrate President Trump's first campaign using 2 female undercover agents. The Washington Times reporting that the program was launched in 2015 by then FBI Director James Comey. The honeypot scheme was actually kept off the books, and according to a whistleblower, Comey's investigation was separate from Crossfire Hurricane. You, of course, know that as the FBI's operation that looked into allegations Trump's campaign colluded with Russia.
Okay, so Patel pushed back on this. I actually covered this a couple of Fridays ago. And what did he push back on? He didn't like the word honeypot because the FBI Agents Association didn't like the word honeypot because they didn't want to actually have that sort of connotation that the FBI does it. But was it legal? It sounds like it might have been. Was it out of FBI policy? Certainly. Can the FBI director break policy? Yes, they can. They can make all kinds of movements, which is why when you have this big organization that can do things that it ought not be able to do, but it can without any sort of technically illegal actions, that's where we have a real problem. And that's what we're looking at. Now, one of those things got corrected, but it's so far away from the proximate cause. And the reason why is because the FBI Agents Association actually covered for this group. What you're seeing on the screen right now are all of the FBI, what we call NEAL Team 6. If you've never heard that term before, I feel like I actually created it. I may have parallel constructed it with some other people. NEAL Team 6 were the FBI agents wearing FBI body armor, marching around in June of 2020 that took a knee for BLM, despite the fact that there was no danger, there was no de-escalation required, and it was spun over and over again, and Chris Wray embraced them. Apparently, everyone that took a knee in this photo and that were out there on this quote-unquote presence patrol, you can see they're wearing masks. The ones that are not wearing masks, what are they doing? They're smiling. They're not in danger. There's no threat there. They took a knee because they thought it was the right thing to do socially. And one of the major reasons they did it, because you'll notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Of the 12 people I see on screen, at least 9 of them are women. And they took a knee for BLM because they're women. Because women are agreeable. That's what women do. They try not to create social strife. It's a survival instinct. I don't hate that. But isn't it interesting as we have an argument about whether men can be women and women can be men and who should be in the military? And if you have a confusion about that, there's also something to be said about certain personality types that are going to cave to public sentiment. And that is exactly what I think happened here. The supervisor's on scene, Amy Oakes. She's in the back there with the white mask. Sarah Linden, she's about to take a knee. She's the hefty girl. Those people took knees. And they're females. And almost all of the people that took knees we saw get promoted aggressively. How interesting. I want to read you the story here that comes from CBS, which is 100% critical of what just happened. Again, the danger is that you spanked the puppy, but it was years after the fact. They got hugged by Chris Wray. They got defended by Larissa Knapp, who was the executive assistant director of the National Security Branch when she retired. She was the special agent in charge of counterterrorism at the Washington field office when this went down. And she yelled at me about this. So this has been a story that I have been aggressively thinking. It's weird to take these scalps, because that's what we've been calling them here, to grab 20 or 22 or 15 or however many people were fired. I don't really feel great about it, but I also think that it had to happen. It just happened so far afterwards that we've lost the impact of what this message was supposed to be. Because all of these people got promoted. They got 5 years longer on the job than I did. So I guess there's that, or 3 years longer. Leaders from the FBI have removed more than a dozen agents who knelt for BLM in the summer of 2020 in Washington, D.C. during the Black Lives Matter protests. Many of these agents had already been demoted or put on administrative leave. Apparently, there was some sort of like half measure that was done in April. One source said that the termination letter to the agents cited their lack of judgment, which is true. This is a tactically unsound move and dangerous. The agents had been photographed kneeling after an encounter with protesters during the demonstration that followed George Floyd's death in May of 2020. This was, I believe, in June, if my memory serves. Kneeling angered some in the FBI, but was also understood as a possible de-escalation tactic. I'm going to debunk that for you right now. The Oversight Project, my friend Mike Howell, actually published a letter that went as an unattributed letter from an FBI agent at Washington Field, where I was working, on June the 12th of 2020. So again, this was June. And this event that took place, the kneeling, was on June the 4th. There was a couple of people that got together and wrote a letter to Chris Wray. Now, it went nowhere. But let's read this real quick. We're writing to address the situation that occurred on June the 4th, 2020, in which some agents of the Washington Field Office knelt at the demand of protesters in the District of Columbia. We feel it necessary to voice our opinions on this event, for we believe to abstain from doing so would be a disservice to our organization and our mission. There are two lenses which one can view this situation. The first is that agents who did so knelt under duress for fear that failing to kneel would incite violence for the protesters. And the second is to view the agents as making a choice to kneel, either as a political statement or for the convenience of following social pressures at the time. Are we being fair? They were being fair. I just said the same thing to you, did I not? It's our belief that in either event, the agents ended up making a profound public statement and a political statement on behalf of the Bureau. And after viewing all available video and photographs of this incident, it is evident that the agents' actions were not taken under duress, but rather by choice. This has been my claim since the beginning, and it's nice to see that other people saw it at the time. The agents' lack of duress can be clearly seen in the photographs and the videos as the group smiled and clapped, even fist pumped in solidarity with the protesters. Further, photographs of the incident show a clear path of escape for the agents if they had in fact been under duress. Additionally, one other FBI squad patrolled a nearby area that same afternoon and met with the same group of protesters at much closer proximity. This squad did not succumb to the demands to kneel, and those agents were not met with violence. So, as I understand it, these people were in fact removed, and they were removed after an OPR investigation, which is the FBI's internal affairs process, and that did the job that it was supposed to do. But it took an awful long time. And those people likely did not actually see the proximate cause of what they did and then the eventual punishment that happened after the fact. That should have been dealt with swiftly. Instead, what you saw was 5 years of encouraging this type of behavior, which I think resulted in the stuff that went on January 6th. Imagine if the Trump administration had actually nipped this in the bud right then. If they had said, nope, Chris Wray, you need to be dealt with. Chris Wray was influenced by the people at the Washington Field Office who were part of that mutual admiration society. You're not going to hear me weep or shed any tears for anybody on the screen that lost their job. And also, I don't think it's going to have the required effect, which is that people in the FBI are like, aha, we cannot engage in leftist policy. No, I think we're going to see a little bit more. And the reason is because you keep putting people into this office that keep having the same types of behaviors. They are too little, too late, far too long after the original inciting incident, and they are not effective. And that includes what they just did with these folks. You know, even though this is a win and Patel did the right thing on this at the long run, they started investigating this in February on his first couple days. And the reason I know that is because the people who started doing that investigation, they're friends of mine. They did this investigation in good faith, but they were not given resources to go out and do it overtly. They were trying to do it in a sneaky way so as not to offend anybody. And that is not how you make an aggressive touch on this organization. I actually understand John Brennan's statement here. He's saying these people cannot move on. The reason we can't move on is because of all the bad things that happened. But the only argument for moving on is that we are now going to adjust our tactics, that we have corrected those tactics, and we are no longer going to have these things happen to us again. Instead, what you see is we're going to try to re-adjudicate things from the past, and we are going to be so far away from the proximate injury that we're not actually going to have a desired effect. I actually agree with what he's saying, but not the reason why he's saying it, if you will. Listen to this. This is coming from MSNBC.
And it's very, very unfortunate that, again, Donald Trump and his people who are supporting him refuse, again, to acknowledge that and move on. We have so many challenges around this world. I was, quite frankly, appalled by what I heard at the United Nations from Donald Trump. We have so many challenges that we really need to bring this country together to focus on, as opposed to continuing to go back 8-10 years and trying to relitigate things that have been, I think, appropriately addressed.
They weren't appropriately addressed. That's the part where he's wrong. But I think they might be too far away. There's a reason why we have a statute of limitations. It's because the cause is so far in the back that we can't actually get a real good grab on it. Nevertheless, We're getting sort of hollow statements coming from Pam Bondi. I'm not real keen on this kind of stuff. I'm okay with the idea. I just don't like the execution. When I was growing up, my dad used to say this all the time. Good idea, bad execution. That was when you had a good plan, but your rollout was not excellent. That would be a great way of categorizing some of this stuff here. I think it's fair to say that the mindset is not wrong, but the actual implementation is.
Whether you're a former FBI director, whether you're a former head of an intel community, whether you are a current state or local elected official, whether you're a billionaire funding organizations to try to keep Donald Trump out of office, everything is on the table. We will investigate you and we will end the weaponization. No longer will there be a two-tier system of justice. And we are working hand in hand, Director Patel and I, Todd Blanche, with our incredible intel community, Tulsi Gabbard, John Radcliffe, going nonstop around the clock. People will be held accountable.
Why is it every time that I see Pam Bondi talk, it looks like she's like taking deep breaths and she's saying things off like a weak teleprompter? Like her ability to speak extemporaneously is so low. It's really strange. I'm always turned off on it. I keep waiting for her to say things like, we just need more maps, such as the Iraq, like a beauty queen girl from South Carolina. That's kind of what they have the same energy to me. It's not entirely convincing. But I think the scarier thing is this. Look, this is another story here. This is coming from NBC. Trump says he would think that DOJ would be investigating former FBI Director Chris Wray. And you would think that, right? Because he falls directly within the statute of limitations. Everything he did was within the last 5 years, including this, or most of the things he did. So I would agree. I think the scariest thing is, and we have to accept this, most of what was done by Brennan, by Clapper, by Comey, by Wray was actually in line with what those authorities of those jobs are. They actually have the ability to execute things with a broad latitude the way that they did. And therefore, there's not a crime there, even though we're all offended by it, even though we all think it was terrible, even though we had an election that I think was a slapdown of this information. The fact of the matter is that Pam Bondi has wide latitude to do all kinds of things, but it turns out she still has to operate within the law. And guess what? So did Merrick Garland. He had the ability to do things that were truly wrong. Remember, one of my whistleblower allegations, my first one that most people heard about, was about parents at school board meetings. But I want to be super clear right now, because Merrick Garland actually had the ability to go out there and tell the FBI to investigate parents at school board meetings. That was within his purview. That is not a whistleblower disclosure that I made. What he didn't have the ability to do was lie about it. Do you see how subtle that is? And why it actually says the thing they were doing is something they were allowed to do? I've been very, very cautious about this. Whenever you hear people, I actually had a guy that was on some very large YouTube channel the other day who was making allegations about what I said as a whistleblower to Jim Jordan. And he was like, oh, he was an anti-vaxxer. And he was talking about how parents, were being, unfairly investigated at school board meetings. False. That's a false statement. What I said is that you cannot go out and tell Congress we are not going to use counterterrorism resources and then have the FBI counterterrorism assistant director send out a memo saying we're going to be using those resources against parents. You cannot lie to Congress during oversight, but you can totally investigate parents at school board meetings. You can find all kinds of reasons to do that. And for anyone who was a J6er or had friends that were J6ers, you understand that they can mobilize the entire weapon system to come after people. And they did so under the authority and the color of law. And they did so properly. The problem is that if you're me, you think that the weapon system should be dismantled. Not that a new person should hold the weapon. Okay? You're not going to hear me cry about James Comey. Period. You're not going to hear my tears for that guy. I think he's a narcissist. I think that he is a legend in his own mind and operated as such. And some of the behaviors that he had were totally pathological. And they were also within his purview as FBI director, which is why he got fired. That's what we can do. The answer should have been make a smaller FBI and not give them the ability to go after people. And not give them FISA authority. And not give them the ability to go out and do all kinds of intelligence investigations with no allegation of criminal activity. This has been the ongoing supposition we have. Here's a little taste of why nobody feels sympathy for James Comey on the right, because this is truly mean-spirited and nasty. But it doesn't mean the things he was saying are not legal, and they were not even legal uses of the FBI. It turns out they were.
Do you agree with the strategy of focusing on the Oath Keepers and focusing on prosecuting that group of individuals first in order for it to be a deterrent?
You've got to throw the net wide, get all of them, both the organized groups, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, but find everybody who went into that building. Find them all. Again, not because of my concern that those people who committed a misdemeanor are they're going to go into the community and reoffend. The message has to be sent of zero tolerance. We will find everyone and punish everyone who went in there so that no one does it again. We will hunt you to the end of the earth, even for a misdemeanor, and make you pay for that to send that message.
This is the same guy that spoke at my graduation where I was taught explicitly that the FBI does not waste its time on misdemeanors. So he clearly was politically motivated with this thing. That's very clear to me from listening to his words. Cast a wide net, go after misdemeanors, name a misdemeanor offense that was prosecuted standalone by Jim Comey when he was the FBI director. I would suggest to you that they were not even allowed as policy. It would have been, I turned away major felonies where tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars were defrauded from people because our bar was in the millions. And you're going to go after a misdemeanor parading charge because somebody happened to be physically in a place where you didn't like it? Now you're playing politics. And again, they have that ability. Patel has that ability. Ray had that ability. We should be concerned about that. Don't give these people the out. This is a story that was from CBS. Amy Klobuchar saying it's appalling that Trump has accused FBI agents of being in the crowd. Trump said it badly over the weekend, folks. He said things that were likely untrue. He said, now we need to investigate this. You are being distracted. This is a laser pointer. The problem is that the agency has too much power, that it is dangerous to Americans, writ large, regardless of your political stance. Again, get rid of your confirmation bias. Assume that the FBI is just interested in doing what's best for the FBI, and you will suddenly understand why it can go after you and after BLM people at the exact same time. Then you don't give Amy Klobuchar any talking points on this. Here's Chris Wray being asked questions. When you let them wiggle around like this, because people who know the FBI are able to get away with it, he's probably not saying anything false in this statement. And we're acting like he did.
Who were there in an undercover capacity on January 6th? How many were there?
Again, I'm not sure that I can give you that number as I sit here. I'm not sure there were undercover agents on scene.
I find that kind of a remarkable statement, Director. At this point, you don't know whether there were undercover federal agents, FBI agents in the crowd or in the Capitol on January 6th.
I say that because I want to be very careful. There have been a number of court filings related to some of these topics, and I want to make sure that I stick within what's in.
I understand that, but I thought I heard you say you didn't know whether there were FBI agents or informants or human sources in the Capitol or in the vicinity on January 6th. Did I misunderstand you? I thought that's what you said.
Well, I referred very specifically to undercover agents.
Yeah. And so are you...
I referred very specifically to undercover agents. Why did he do that, folks? Because technically he's correct, because being an undercover agent in the FBI is very specific. All agents are in plain clothes. All agents have the ability to tell you something false. I used to sit in a non-undercover role in somebody's neighborhood. And if you knocked on my window and asked me what you're doing, I would tell you I'm with the Postal Inspection Service or I'm part of the U.S. Marshals. If you made me as law enforcement, I might tell you I'm part of a neighborhood watch. I can lie to you with impunity. I don't have to tell you anything true. But I wasn't an undercover agent. Even though I'm sitting in regular clothes, looking like you guys saw me, you guys are getting a kick out of the lumberjack outfit. Yeah, this is just a Costco flannel plaid shirt that I wore when I was working in Portland. I had a couple different color stuff like that. And it's like, okay, you just look like a guy in Portland. You know, I had a picture underneath there of the state of Utah, and it was shooting a pine tree out. I don't have to tell you anything as a federal agent, but I wasn't an undercover. Undercover is a program. It is a certification. That's like you asking, let me give an example for those who have previous experience in military, let's say if I went up there and said, were there any soldiers in the crowd last night? And I said, there were absolutely no infantrymen in the crowd. And people would go, oh, I see. So there were not any soldiers in the crowd there? I thought there were like members of the United States Army in there. You're like, there was no member of our infantry marching around in the crowd. Do you see how I'm talking past it? An infantryman is a very specific and exclusive subset of the broader speaking term soldiers, which refers to everybody in the army. Does that make sense? It's really critical to understand that they are playing a game. Chris Wray, he even doubles down on says, I'm very specifically talking about undercovers, because he probably knows they didn't authorize any specific undercover authorization. But that doesn't mean that there were not plainclothes people that were in the crowd. I know for a fact that there were people in the crowd that wanted to be there. They took time off to go out there and they were protesting because they were pissed about what happened to Trump. So that's a thing. We have to be very careful where this stuff comes from. All right, I want to talk about Portland because Portland is maybe the most important retouch of all of these things. There are multiple news stories right now where everybody is upset and everybody wants to get involved. This is coming from NPR. 3 things to know about Trump's plan to send troops to Portland and also to Memphis. He says he's ordered the deployment of troops to Portland. He's authorized to use full force to curb protests outside of ICE facilities. And in the latest, he wants to deploy military troops into various cities that are plagued with crime. No, I'm sorry. They aren't plagued with crime. He says are plagued with crime. This is NPR after all. With federal troops expected to rise in Memphis later this week as well. 1, expect a legal fight. Well, that's going to happen. I can show you that the state of Oregon is actually suing. He's called Portland war ravaged, which is not the case on the ground. They state definitively because they are totally not doing editorials. That's pretty funny. What else should we expect? Trump has been making these threats for months. He's been talking about cracking down on these facilities. And lastly, the larger picture is becoming clear that the National Guard is not trained for community policing or to make arrests, and that's not generally how they use. When they've been in D.C., they've mostly been patrolling federal property and beautifying city parks. Guess what's really interesting about beautifying city parks? When places look nice, people tend to act as they should in that environment. When people are living in spaces that look like this, where Mad Max clowns are running around with freaking swords, I kid you not, when I walked around in Portland, my wife and I were talking about this over the weekend. I carried a tomahawk with me because I knew it was a melee weapon that was capable of defending me over and over again, and I didn't have to reload it. I also carried a gun that had I loaded with cotton gloves on. I was a federal agent with the authority to carry a firearm on an airplane and in any city in America. And I also knew that if I went to Portland and I got involved in saving my own life with lethal force, I would probably be prosecuted by the AUSA there, and I probably would have never been able to see my family again. So I made sure that if I had to have a deniable weapon system, which is a really unsettling thing to say, if you're in law enforcement right now, imagine the idea that you might need a drop gun, not to be able to put on someone that you arrested because you needed them to understand what was going on. Like you needed to fake, like you needed a reason to take them down. No, you needed a drop gun so that if you shot somebody and you abandoned the weapon system, that you would not be found. Do you understand? Not because you were not justified in using force, but because the system was set up to come after you and protect like the a-holes that you see on the screen here that were running around in the snack van, or this clown that's got a skateboard and a freaking sword made out of rebar. Do you know how scary that is? Because that's how scary it was there. I sat wearing body armor underneath my my hoodie almost every night. And I had 6 people surround my vehicle when I was miles away from a protest because they called in my license plate, because this was an organized group of people trying to do violence, and they were looking for federal officers or agents that were involved, and they didn't care if they were right or wrong. They ran off a couple of our guys. We disengaged because we were not authorized to stay there and hold our ground. That's why we need this touch, because a lot of these people learned the exact wrong lesson from 2020. So retouching 2020 in a different way is very good. I want to read you this story about Portland that's going to go and do this lawsuit. Portland has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration. Again, NPR is correct about that. There will be lawfare. After the president said he's going to send troops to Portland, the Attorney General, Dan Rayfield, announced on Sunday that they were going to do it. This comes after Secretary of Defense, aka the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, sent a memo to Governor Tina Kotek, the first openly lesbian governor of Oregon, I found out. She dresses like a man, just not a particularly attractive man. That's neither here nor there. It's just funny that that's the first thing that it says in her bio, that she wants you to know that she's openly lesbian. So if it's important to her, it's important to me, I guess. They are authorizing 200 members of the National Guard to do what? To be deployed around to protect federal property where protests occur. The lawsuit says that Trump lacks the authority to federalize the National Guard. Turns out that California already tried this in Los Angeles and they were knocked down. They're going to do it again because everything has to be processed. Is the punishment? Let's kind of consider what's going on there. Let's kind of do a little take on how this works. I want to show you a city councilwoman in Portland that is going to attempt to, quote unquote, resist getting their city back into order, to rid themselves of some of the nonsense that's been going on. And then I want to show you kind of like back to back this flower protest and then some beatings, which are pretty fun too. I don't know. One of the best things that came out of this weekend was like watching a harder touch on people that really, really needed to be spanked like toddlers.
All right, so here's what council is currently looking into. Right now, some of our offices are looking into doing a ban on ICE agents being able to mask up and not be identified. This has been a huge issue because people are getting kidnapped off of our streets, and it could be just any random guy in a mask telling you that he's a federal agent when it could just be a kidnapper. So obviously that's a huge issue. There are folks at the congressional level that are trying to get a mask ban passed, but they might not have the votes to do it. And again, because of the supremacy clause, we are trying to look into any and all options, but that doesn't mean that we are going to be able to pass something that will actually be able to be implemented. Councillor Samir Kanal is researching policies regarding munitions and tear gas because we know that's something that is heavily impacting the health of our residents in Portland. My office has taken more of the data and surveillance privacy approach because I think that the next frontier of fighting fascism is going to be immense government surveillance. So that includes anything from license plate readers to facial recognition technology. And it would be really helpful if people who are on the ground who are able to see some of that technology that ICE is using, if you could photograph it and send it to our offices, that's all information that we can use to try to figure out where we need to target because it's not freely available to us, all of the tools that they have at their disposal.
Okay, you cannot do anything about what the federal government wants to use when it comes to tools. You can't. You're not able to do that. That's not an opportunity that you have as a city council member in Portland. If the federal government wants to employ license plate readers, it's not fascism, and you can't stop them. There's a supremacy clause, which she stated. You cannot mandate that they not wear masks. You have no authority on them, and they don't have to listen to you. I have walked away from cops who were trying to stop me when I was doing my job as a federal agent. I've driven away from cops who had their lights on. When I had no license plates and I was driving into those protests in 2020 in Washington, D.C., I drove away from Virginia State Police. I just drove on. I just didn't stop. There was no reason to. They had no authority to stop me. So I just kept going. And the guy was confused. He pulled up next to me. He's like, what the hell? And here I am dressed up, FBI van. Like I got FBI body armor on. I'm in quote unquote plain clothes, although it looked kind of tactical. And I just kept driving. So what you're seeing right now on the screen, for those of you that are seeing, and you're hearing some traffic in the background if you're just listening, this is a good thing to see. This is a flower protest. This is a silent marching protest for people who are laying down flowers at the ICE facility. This is how they are going to quote unquote resist. There's a man wearing a woman's spaghetti strap little tiny tank top. That's super gross. There's a bunch of like real nasty, gnarly libtards that are from Oregon. There's some really odd ducks in Oregon and in Portland specifically. The sad thing is it's an absolutely beautiful state and it has such a great potential. What you're showing here is the mean ICE people. They've got everything all boarded up. All the glass is all covered and they're laying flowers down and people are throwing the thumbs down sign silently. They're flicking off the federal agents silently. They're all giving exactly what they want to see in the world. They're sharing how angry they are, okay? I am not a terrorist, this lady says. A guy wearing a chicken suit says, Portland will outlive him, talking about Donald Trump. There's the man wearing the spaghetti strap. Okay, this is how ridiculous these people are. That went until it got dark. This is the same way it was when I was in Portland. Everybody was peaceful. Everybody was demonstrating. Everybody was marching and had something to say until it got dark and they thought they could get away with shenanigans. And then you start seeing stuff like this. I would be totally fine if your entire protest was dropping flowers on the ground. That's not where it ends. It ends with you getting dragged into those exact same gates that they are flicking off just a little bit later. Here we go. Uh-oh. Somebody threw a helmet. You got 8 guys dragging somebody like a rag doll right into those gates that they were flicking off a few minutes earlier. And then you're going to see the riot cops come out. And here they are. They've got the right equipment on. They've got helmets. They've got gloves. They've got eye protection. They've got pepper ball guns. And you're going to see there's that exact same space that all the flowers are. They were just stepping on the right-hand side of the screen. This is the post-millennial showing some. And suddenly those same people that were peaceful and friendly are all wearing gas masks and they're all ready for violence. Isn't that something? It's truly craziness to see it. This is why we need a do-over from 2020. This is why we need another touch on some of this stuff. Because these people were not making sense. And the people that don't make sense, they all kind of have that same sound. They sound like that city councilwoman. They sound like the women that we're going to see here. They sound kind of like Kamala Harris if given enough time. Word salads and nonsense. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about absolute ideological leftists that believe that the system is the problem and that the person can be redeemed. The person is inherently good. Well, we can see that people are not always inherently good. They can pretend to be good and put flowers down, and they can immediately turn around and do the other thing, like try to fight with cops. So this is kind of an interesting little exchange. This is a man who's talking about, hey, maybe we could talk about that not everybody is good. Some people are mentally ill. Some people break bad. Some people are just always bad. It's a human condition.
This bill is really focused on punishment, and I just want to look at these types of considerations with a bigger lens.
We're talking about people. We're talking about victims. We're talking about perpetrators. We're talking about human beings doing things to other human beings that should not be done. And what are we going to do about that? And again, what this bill says is that when you get your third violent felony conviction, we're done. Like, we're not playing anymore. Like, I past that point, I don't know if I care if you ever become a productive citizen, because you have opted out of productive society. Your third violent felony conviction? I don't know how interested I am in making sure you get educated and you get at that point, you're talking about a chronic dysfunction in a person's ability to be a member of society. And past that point, it is the responsibility of those of us who govern society to protect everyone else, to protect everyone who is functional, who isn't harming their neighbor, who isn't violating the rights of others. I'll give you some stats that I know are solid and that.
He goes on to talk about some juveniles who had hundreds of victims between like 6 guys, 6 young men who were juveniles and got engaged in felonious activity and violence. It's some people just don't want to be part of the social system. And maybe we can co-opt them in at a young age, but if you can't, at some point in time, he's right. We have to kind of cut bait there. We got a lot of real gentle, soft, positive parenting in 2020 for the angry toddler, like whatever they were, tantrums that were going on in the political left. And they learned the wrong lessons. So it's suicidal empathy, it's compassion, it's kindness for weakness, right? The mistake. It is time to come in with a hand, but it needs to actually be proximate to the cause. And you can start it in your own house. You can start it in your own community. And like, I do it and I don't even want to do it. I feel weird doing it, but like when I see people like not disciplining their children and their children are acting in a completely antisocial manner, I'm going to do it. Apparently you need someone else to do it. It's either going to be me or a cop. So when your kid wants to run up the slide, when there's a 2-year-old coming down the slide and it's made for 2-year-olds and your 10 or 12-year-old wants to run up it and doesn't care about little kids' safety, I'm going to backhand them off the slide for safety, for the little ones, because I care about kids. And then I'm going to look at them very meaningfully and say, don't do that because you should have done that as a parent. Sorry, real simple. And if my kid does it and you happen to take my kid off the slide because they're acting like a little a-hole, so be it. I cannot imagine some of the sort of disrespect that young people have, and they grow up into those adults that drop flowers and then show up later and try to fight with ICE officers. And I wonder if they come from people who are children of the community. Well, as Kamala Harris said, the children of the community are the children of the community. That means the community does have a role. I don't actually disagree with her, even though she sounds drunk and crazy. Let's do some word salad. I'm not going to call it a trigger warning, but Kamala Harris warning.
You know, one of my favorite things to see, and it would always happen spontaneously at our rallies, and thousands of people would come. And it would happen is invariably somebody would want me to take a picture or to hug their child. And someone in the back would hand that baby over through the crowd.
Up to you?
People who would
bless the baby.
But pass the baby.
See?
And then pass the baby back.
Pass the baby back.
And I don't know, there was something about that when it would happen. I mean, I could get very emotional about it right now. But you know, I believe that we should always feel that, you know, the children of the community are the children of the community.
Yeah.
Of all of us, that
our next leaders, our next thinkers,
and that we all participate in caring about that child.
Yeah.
and in caring for that child.
Yeah.
And there was just something about that.
And seeing the baby travel from the parent.
Yes, and the parent.
Look, I'm speculating here, but I think that's a gay guy talking to a childless woman in her 50s. What a weird, weird moment we're living in right now. All right, if you guys are watching, make sure you like us over on Rumble, like us on YouTube. If you're on X, do the same thing. Locals, you can find us at kyleserafin.com. If you want to see any of the articles that are referenced today, do that. Check out us over on Spotify. We'd really appreciate it if you did. It's kyleserafin.com. It's super easy to do. I won't torment you anymore. Let's get a reaction to that drunken breakfast, whatever nonsense that was, because it turns out that our vice president actually said it correctly. And for all of this book tour and talking about, oh, Kamala Harris, 107 days of this is probably the funny. I actually do like JD Vance. I think he's smarter than Trump, for whatever it's worth, for all of you guys out there. I like him more than Trump because we're closer in age and he seems like he's got the right amount of militant. He's also not mean, but he's very accurate with this fire. Check this out.
Problem is not that Kamala's campaign was too short, it's that it was too long. That when people actually listened to what she had to say, her polling went down and down and down. I think that if we had a 150-day campaign, we probably would have had 3 additional Republican senators, and Donald Trump would have won by an even bigger landslide, because the more people know about Kamala Harris, the more they realize there's no substance there. I mean, agree or disagree with Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, they actually had substance. They could actually articulate a viewpoint. I listened to Kamala Harris for 90 seconds, and I actually feel like I've gotten dumber in the process, and I have no idea what she actually believes. That's the problem with Kamala Harris, and it's going to continue to be her problem unless she actually learns how to develop a viewpoint, articulate it for the American people. Just say what you actually believe. Don't do this word salad, talking around in circles. It doesn't work, and it's why she didn't win.
Okay, brilliant. Actually, that's a broader problem for people on the political left, the hard left. Not people that are liberals that we can have like good faith debate with, because there are people like that and I see them all the time. No, I'm talking about hard leftists that are not being disavowed by their own party and by their own system because they don't get it. They are living in la la land. And they actually think that the reason that Kamala Harris didn't win was because of racism and misogyny, I guess. I think the people came out and spoke and said, yeah, we want something. We want to retouch. We want to revisit the stupidity that happened at the end of 2020 and maybe all the way through all that COVID chaos. But what we'd like to see it done is like as an adult. Say real things, do real meaningful actions, de-weaponize government would be great. By the way, the left will benefit from it just as much as we will. They'll benefit right now, and then we'll benefit the next time that they're in power. We could have a good faith society if we have that. Or we can keep doing this thing where we do tit for tat and see how many people we can really, really destroy. Again, you know you're in an interesting space when JD Vance makes a point and Bill Maher is making the same point. I say JD Vance is probably a little bit more moderate than I am when it comes on the right. Bill Maher, he's liberal, but not a wild leftist all the time. And he's moderated on Trump even because he got to meet the guy. It turns out, isn't that something? You go out and meet your neighbor. You go out and meet somebody and you realize that there's a human being behind that face. Isn't that fun? I'm going to give you guys a palate cleanse in 1 second. Maybe, you know what? This is the palate cleanse. Let's just take a breath when Bill Maher says the same thing that JD Vance says.
She could have had 701 days and would have still lost that race.
107 days, way too many for anybody, but including her.
Right.
But the more they got to know her, the less they liked her. I've said this many times on this show. Other countries don't do this. They don't have years to run. They call an election, and they have an election in a month.
Yeah, and nor the influence of money. We should do that. Right?
Yeah, that's going to be hard to get rid of. They've tried. Yeah. But, no, it's like you don't need 100 days. You need 107 days. You tell people your plan. This is what I am for. This is my thing. You're selling something. You're selling a vacuum cleaner. If I'm selling a vacuum cleaner, I'll tell you why I think it's best. Am I going to tell you every goddamn day for 2 years? Did I tell you about the attachment that gets under the... Yeah, you did. You told me 1,000 times.
They told you all the things, and nobody wanted it. That seems pretty reasonable. I'm kind of behind that. I like the idea of a shorter campaign season. Also, I really actually hate politics, guys. If we didn't have to talk about politics because it wasn't a life-threatening thing for all of us, my life would be better too. And I would be probably less stressed. I probably wouldn't have an FBI director's girlfriend suing me because of the political pressure that he was dealing with because he wasn't good at his job. That's my final shot on that one. I hope you guys have a fantastic afternoon on this Monday. I hope you come back and listen again tomorrow. We go live at 09:30 Eastern time. That's 8:30 here in Texas, America. Share the program, send the link, find a friend, and send KyleSerafinShow.com. Send them over to Spotify. We'll look forward to seeing you guys after this little evening. We'll see what this week has for us. I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. God bless you. See you then.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.